Hello everyone. Welcome to the new episode. Start over. Hello everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Opinions New by Dr. Frank Tianxie. I'm Frank. Okay. In this lecture, let's talk about the Chinese Communist Party's nightmare of a Boxer Protocol of 2020. Okay. All right. We all know about we heard about the Wuhan pandemic, right? The CCP virus and the Wuhan pandemic. Excuse me. But what is exactly the source of the source of the origin of the virus? Yeah. There had been theories about this virus being, manufactured in lab in China, or maybe or accidental leak of the virus to a seafood market in Wuhan and then to China and the world, right? But given the fact that the Chinese communist has been lying, about the numbers, the death toll, uh, infection rate, and the spread of the virus, and deceived the world. And of course, we know that the Chinese communists, has everything to do with that, with this pandemic that cost uh, hundreds of thousands of lives in the world today and trillions of dollars in losses in economy. Okay? So this Wuhan virus is being called the CCP virus, and that's for good reasons. I support that. Okay, but nowadays, as we are still trying to trace, to identify the affected, and also trying to find a cure or and vaccine, and there are many lawsuits filed against the Chinese communists. Yeah. More of that are coming on the way, and that will bring, excuse me, huge, legal and financial pressure to the regime. And the total compensation or the lawsuit, could be in the trillions of US dollars, right? Or hundreds of trillions of dollars. But who is going to pay for it? How is China going to pay for that? Okay? This year 2020, if you're familiar with the Chinese calendar, it's Chinese lunar calendar. We know it's this year of the rat. Okay? And this rat, or Gengzinian, year of Gengzinian. The Chinese lunar calendar follows a 60-year, cycle. Every 60 years, the zodiac, every 12 years, zodiac starts, and every 60 years, the whole cycle starts again. So this back about 120 years ago, that's actually two cycles back. In 1901, there was the Boxer Protocol, and that resulted in China paying hundreds of thousands, actually in hundreds of millions of taels of silver to other countries, Western countries. Okay? What's happening there in the Boxer Protocol? Okay? In 1901, right, the Qing dynasty of China signed an agreement with the 11 countries. It's a compensation, agreement, and it is to compensate those foreign powers, 11 countries, for the rebellions, Boxer Rebellion or the Boxer Uprising. Okay? And this Boxer Uprising started when the Boxers, or they call themselves the Militia United in Righteousness, or Yihe Tuan, in China, in northern China province, Chinese province of Shandong, they started their campaign, their uprising campaign against foreigners, especially Western Christian missionaries, and because they believe that Western Christian missionaries were not paying their taxes, because their tax exempt status, and also they used, abused rather abused their extraterritorial rights. So therefore, they started this together, coupled with actually the severe drought and loss of harvest in those kind of countryside in rural area of China. And there's then this Boxers Rebellion. Okay? Those people were practicing Chinese martial arts. They believed that they were invulnerable to Western's weapons, and their slogan was to eliminate all the Westerners, Western Christians, Western missionaries, and support the Qing dynasty. Yeah. So in the end, of course, there were eight nations, you know, uh, sending their troops, or 20,000 troops to China, to Beijing, to crush the Boxer rebellions, together with actually with the Qing dynasty imperial army. The Qing dynasty, in the Qing dynasty, Qing court, imperial court, they were split into two factions. Okay? Empress Dowager Cixi, the famous Dowager Cixi, and she was originally sided with the rebellions and the Boxer rebellions. She thought that they could be the force that she could use, but some other officials, including some military officials, were in favor of protecting the Westerners. So, but in the end, anyhow, after the invasion, the eight nation alliance, marched into Beijing, and of course there was looting and other things, happening afterwards, and of course many people, including Western missionaries, and some of the soldiers from the West, eight countries, were killed. Right? And many more, of course, boxers were killed. They're farmers, farmer peasant boxers. Okay? Then the two sides signed the agreement, called the Boxer Protocol of 1901. Okay? In that case, that's in the year of Gengzi, the 60-year cycle, 1 year of a 60-year cycle. Today is actually, it coincides, with that year as another cycle, two cycles of 60 years just passed. Now, with the China, with today with this compensation seeking lawsuit against Chinese Communist government, and countries, states, and civilians are seeking compensations from China, from Chinese government. So China is again, facing huge lawsuits, and this is not against, not from just eight nations, you know, that's 120 years ago. This year, now it could be 80 countries, 80 nations, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Okay, the new, Boxer Protocol compensation payment to China, from China. In 1901, the total monetary value of this Boxer Protocol is about 450 million, 450 million tael or tahil of silver. Right? Converted to US dollars back then was about 33 million US dollars. Okay, okay, not today's dollars. Okay, and of course, this compensation, the payment that was not to be paid, in a lump sum. It's actually has 39 years. China, back Qing dynasty, Chinese government had 39 years to pay it back at the interest rate of 4%. Okay, so with the interest and principal, the total payment was not 450 million tael of silver, but rather 980 million tael of silver, or 725 million US dollars back then. But 725 million US dollars back in 1900 is equals about 21.3 billion US dollars today, about 21 billion dollars. Doesn't seem to be too much, right? But it's a lot. That money, 450 is more than the annual tax revenue of the Qing dynasty. Okay? And the Western countries, Western powers asked China for the payment in order to pay for the cost of the war and and the interest, and also compensate the foreigners, missionaries, merchants, and business for their losses, and also the churches, and including the churchgoers, Chinese Christians, killed or damaged or hurt, during the conflict. So, how was the money raised and paid? That the Boxer Protocol, the money, according to the agreement, was using Chinese tariff on salt as collateral. And Hong Kong Shanghai Bank in Shanghai was among the banks that pretty processed the loan payment. But then soon after that, soon after the protocol was signed, the gold price went up, shot up back then in the world market, and the silver price went down. And then the Western powers say, hey, this is going to costing us something. So the Western powers demanded to the money, the compensation be paid in gold instead of silver, and that caused a huge deficit in in the government um, budget of the Qing dynasty. And then soon after that, World War One broke out, right? And China was part of the forces against the Germans, and then many countries actually, since they became allies with China, Imperial China, many countries actually, give up their payment, give up their claim, and some even paid back a part of the monies, and especially America. Many Chinese people know and heard and or read about this. America actually, the U.S. actually returned lots of a big part of the money paid to American government, and they used that money to help with educations, build universities, institutions in China. I'm from Peking. I graduated from Peking University in China, in Beijing, China. There's another university you might have heard about. It's called the Tsinghua University. It's an excellent school right next to my alma mater, Peking University, because Tsinghua University, that university, well-known school, is established using that money. So, in the nutshell, in the end, after the war is over, after the payment is over, after many countries, forfeiting or um um give up on the payment, the Qing dynasty, Qing government, they eventually paid about the 650 million tahels of silver. Right now, with this Chinese CCP virus, I call this CCP virus, and the Wuhan pandemic ongoing, the losses in lives, in human lives, and the properties are just huge. The losses, huge losses. And many countries, including America, the U.S., have proposed, recovery or assistance plans and legislations and funds to pay, to pay like in the U.S. pay for unemployment workers, pay unemployed workers, and to pay universities, businesses, and to buy those medical supplies, etc. Right? The cost is huge. That's why many governments, including many state governments and private parties, they are asking, they're suing the Chinese government for the loss. They will not let the CCP, Chinese communists, be off the hook. Right? Former U.S. Attorney General Larry Clement actually filed a group lawsuit in the northern districts of Texas, and for a lawsuit against the Chinese government. I think they're asking for 20 trillion US dollars. Okay, that's in Texas. And Indian lawyers legal association in India, they actually filed the lawsuit or appeal to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Right, they're saying that because of the cover up of the pandemic by the Chinese government, they are also seeking 20 trillion US dollars in damage compensation. Okay. Another lawsuit is in by a law firm called Berman's law firm in Palm Beach, Palm Beach, Boca Raton in Palm Beach of Florida, and they're asking for another lawsuit asking for billions of US dollars. Okay. There is a think tank by the British think tank called the Henry Jackson Society, HJS, Henry Jackson Society. They proposed that the Chinese government, violated, their global health, health obligations, and the code, and resulted in millions of people of, infected, including Prime Minister of England, right? And also, so the losses to countries, seven country group, including the United States and Japan, is that they estimated as 3.2 trillion British pounds. That's 6.5 trillion US dollars. So another, the vice prime minister of Great Britain, together with 15 conservative parliamentarians, asked to re-examine the U.S., not U.S., sorry, Sino-British relationships. They're seeking let me see here, 350 billions in pounds in compensation. Another lawsuit led by an Australian senator, Alex Antique. He suggests to the Australian government to seek compensation from the Chinese government in the amount of 508 billion US dollars. And also, he also asked that they could use, if China does not pay, they could take back the port of Darwin that China, leased from Australia. Okay. What about the U.S. government? Right? The U.S. federal government has not done anything. Right. Well, I think for one reason is that the pandemic in U.S. is still ongoing, right? And the losses in human lives and wealth is still, ongoing, is still mounting. So, but from what we have heard, or seen from the Trump administration, I don't think the U.S. government will let the Chinese government communists, escape from this. Okay, if you look at the financial aid package, money we already spent in this country to help recover from the pandemic, the money is already in the $10 trillion range. Okay, so if you add up all the claims or lawsuits from all the countries, plus the additional money that the U.S. is spending, what will spend, now we're talking about the 6 trillion US dollars. I'm sorry, 60 trillion US dollars. So the overall total compensation sought or lawsuits against Chinese, could be in the range of, I believe, 90 to 100 trillion US dollars. Now, that is 4,000 times the protocol, the money, of the 1901, Boxer Protocol. And that, 100 trillion US dollars on average to every Chinese citizen amounts to about 70,000 Chinese US dollars. 70,000 US dollars, per person in China. Okay. Also, the lawsuit against Chinese communists is not just a lawsuit or seeking financial compensation, and there are actually something about some solid background. It's probably on pretty solid ground with regard to international law. Right? U.S. Senator Josh Hawley, proposed an act called the Justice for Victims of COVID-19 Act. Justice for Victims of COVID-19 Act. And in the act, he believed that the Chinese communists should take the responsibility for this global pandemic breakout. Okay? And the act will deprive the Chinese government or Chinese Communist government their sovereign immunity. Therefore, the Chinese government could use sovereign immunity to dodge, to stay away from being sued. So if this act is passed, and that would deprive Chinese of the sovereign immunity, and then the people or groups or state local governments of U.S. could actually seek damage. Okay? So also this act is asking the State Department of the United States government to have to form a task force on the victims of Chinese CCP virus, and asking the Chinese for payment. Okay? I have been in talks with many people about this issue, about this potential lawsuits and judgment. Okay, many people are afraid. Many people feel that they were worried about this, and some said that we can file lawsuit, we can seek justice, but maybe we can just seek justice, right? Ask the Chinese government, the Communist government, to acknowledge that they deceived, they covered up, and maybe we can skip the money part, right? Some feel like it is unfair to the Chinese people, because it's actually just the communist regime that did the thing, that did the crime, committed crime. Why should the people of China be the one to pay for the to pay for that? Okay, some people even use the example of Nazi Germany. Okay? Even though Nazi Germany caused huge damage to the world, but the other countries, allied countries, including the United States and European countries, were not excuse me, requesting the ordinary German citizens to shoulder the burden. Okay, it seemed to me, in my opinion, we should seek justice, but in seeking justice, there should be monetary uh, the payment, compensation, because you have to have monetary compensation so the perpetrators will feel the pain. There will be there will be the effect of punishment, and so to ensure that the similar acts, will not occur again. Okay? The Nazi Germans, brought the world, so much lots of disasters, but and also the German people, under the help of Allied forces, got rid of Nazi rule, and then they got, their death was, uh, they were not accused of, were not, obligated to pay back to compensate. I think the same should apply to China. Right? The Chinese people should and must, sever the ties with the Chinese communists, right? Get rid of Chinese communist rule, and then they can ask for a waiver. Why is that? Because if you think about that, to the other countries of the world, the virus is from China, right? And the truth is, disguised by the Chinese government, right? They may not view Chinese regime and as something separate from the Chinese station, Chinese nation, or Chinese people, Chinese country, right? The country of China. They may view that the Chinese regime as something similar to other governments, but that's not the case, right? And even though the Chinese Communist regime is the one that's governing that land and that people, right? But the thing is, that's the only thing they can seek, right? It is the current the people of China really, for whatever reasons, historical reasons, is allowing the party, the Chinese Communist Party, to rule China. You can see that the Chinese communists hijacked the people of China and the resources of China. But if that is being hijacked by the communist regime, for the other countries of the world, if they don't seek compensation from China, who else can they go after? Right? Right? Can they go after the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party? The party may say, "Hey, we don't have party properties, belonging to the party, but they would use the resource and the assets of the nation to pay back the debt." So that's why the countries, all the other countries, nations will try all the other, many different ways to seek compensation. Okay? China has, in many countries, especially in the United States, many assets. Right? There are many state-owned companies or enterprises that are investing or buying properties in China, in America, in other countries. Right? So maybe the U.S. government or the local governments in America will or can sue the Chinese communists in the international tribunal. But if they can't do that, they can at least try to seek lawsuits, in courts in the U.S. as what they did right now, just now, uh, what they just did in Florida and Texas. Right? If they can win the lawsuit, and then the court could actually, confiscate the company's assets and money owned by the Chinese government in America, and also the bond, the U.S. Treasury bonds, so it's owned by the Chinese central bank, Chinese government, and also import-export tariffs are also other ways, among the ways those countries can consider to get paid. So now, when the whole world is suing the Chinese communists, what about the people of China, right? People of China. As I said, I just told you, if the world is seeking 100 trillion, U.S. dollars in compensation, that's on average 70,000 U.S. dollars per person to every Chinese citizen. It is unfair to the Chinese people, Chinese citizen. They really shouldn't be held accountable to the crimes of Chinese communists. So to the people of China, to the country of China, to the state of China, to the country of China, if you do not want to shoulder this heavy debt, right? Really, there's no other way, and there's only one way. That is to you need to sever the tie with the Chinese communist, right? Get rid of the Chinese communist, right? Get rid of the Chinese communist regime because it's their responsibility, it's their guilt, even they're trying hard to to stay innocent, but it is their guilt and it's still their problem, right? That they have to take the responsibility. Okay, so if you try, we see in 1901 under the Boxers Protocol, eventually those countries were nations, 11 countries, forgave large part of the money owed by the Chinese government. Now, today, if China or people of China, or maybe the future government of China, for them to seek to try to get a waiver as well, just like 120 years ago, they really don't have another. They really have no choices. As long as the Chinese communist is in power, the other countries will continue to pursue. Okay? And because you have chosen this scoundrel government regime to be the ruler of your country, right? And as nations pursue their lawsuit, right, and seek compensation, the Chinese people will have to shoulder the burden, right? But if the communist regime, I think that is really in the process of collapsing, right? As truth is emerging, people are more aware of the atrocities, and people are more aware of the truth, and they know that they can let the world people of the world know that it's really the fault of Chinese communists. It's not the fault of the people of China. In that case, and in that day, on that day, I think the countries will reconsider, just as they did 120 years ago, that since the Chinese communist was indeed the real culprit, they might be able, to forgive the debt, right? Forgive that. Okay. So as long as the communist is in power, Chinese people will have to pay. And when the Chinese communist is gone, the people of China could then seek a waiver and renegotiate, the debt. That's my conclusion. Okay, so we have been hearing the words, the heaven or is heavily mandate to eliminate Chinese communists. So this is really not just something a moral victory of Chinese people, but also comes with the huge economic benefit. Okay, that's all I have for today's episode. Thank you. I'll see you next time in Opinions New by Dr. Frank Tian Shay.